I already have everything that I need in life. And circling back on full circle to that conversation, I told you at the beginning when he said that, it kind of hit me in for a second, even though everyone was kind of still talking. And I had like the kind of like goosebumps or like hairs kind of stand up in the back of your chest. I was like, holy crap, that's such a paradigm shift to think about, man. I didn't really lose anything. I mean, I lost some money, but what is money? It's not even real. Our financial system, it's not backed by anything.
Welcome to Under Pressure, the podcast about becoming better men when it counts. I'm Cody Laughlin.
And I'm Brian Alfaro. Each week, we have honest conversations about building businesses, leading families, carrying responsibility, and the pressure that comes with trying to do all of it well. If that sounds like your world, you're in the right place.
No hype, no pretending we've got it all figured out, just real stories, real struggles, and what we're learning along the way. Let's get into it.
Before we get started, if today's topic resonates with you, you'll probably enjoy The Forge. It's our free weekly newsletter where we share lessons, stories, and practical ideas around business, family, responsibility, and becoming better men. You can join at forgingbettermen.com. Now let's get into it. Cheers, Cody.
Cheers.
So I was at a real estate conference this past weekend, hanging out with some good guys, some good dudes, successful entrepreneurs, successful real estate investors. And we were having an interesting, deep discussion at dinner. And one of the guys brought up that he was in a situation recently where he was in a dark place because he lost essentially several millions of dollars.
Ooh, that's tough. That's a tough one. How do you think that impacted him, or what do you think changed?
Well, that was an interesting part of the conversation is he started off by saying that he was in a dark place for a couple weeks and kind of had his head in the sand. But he then said something that really stuck with me, that everyone at the table that was sitting around talking just quietly nodded their head. And he said that he hadn't really lost anything because whether we realize it or not, most people already have all the things in life that we really have been chasing.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's make that the conversation today, because I think it's important that we understand, how do we still build wealth without letting money dictate the value of our lives?
Yeah, so that conversation, Cody, when we kept going a little bit deeper and talking about it, I think for him, what he realized was for those 2 weeks that he was really depressed. And I think a lot of us do that as men. We label our success in terms of money, in the sense that if our bank account isn't big, we're not feeling very successful. It becomes a measuring stick for us. Mm-hmm. And the point of the conversation that he realized, again, it took him a couple of weeks, was like, man, I already have everything I need. Why am I measuring my life by how much money is in my bank account?
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting inflection point for a lot of us, because to your point, we go through our professional careers in the years, especially the years that we're most productive, in that pursuit of financial achievement. Mm-hmm. And that's different for every person. Your definition of achievement is a lot different than mine, and vice versa. But when we go through our lives chasing money and chasing wealth and chasing the financial aspirations that we have, we tend to forget what's important to us. What are the real meaning of having a fulfilled life and value to life? Because, we've talked about this before, but on your deathbed, that money ain't following you anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's not what's most important. Although I don't know what it is about us as men that we allow ourselves to fall into that trap. We allow the money to kind of dictate our behaviors, so to speak, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. As a society, we tend to label people that have a nice car or have a nice house, or say they have a high net worth or a bunch of real estate. In our industry, we've kind of learned over the years that people say like, I have 5,000 doors or whatever. And then you start to realize the more you're in the game of life, and then of course in business, entrepreneurship, and real estate, that a lot of it is sometimes just smoke and mirrors, and none of it really matters. What really matters in business, of course, is not your top line or how many doors you have, it's your cash flow and your revenue. And then life as a husband and as a father, we first, I think coming out of school, we're chasing a good job. We're chasing a high salary. We want to grow our salary. We want to buy nicer things, buy that first house, buy that first car, show the world that we're successful, show our parents we're successful. We kind of have some outside pressure sometimes. And that becomes like a cycle that you can't really get out of. And you start, whether you realize it or not, trying to keep up with the Joneses. In that moment, I think what was interesting for him was he started to become a little bit more upset, not because he lost some money, but how he was looking at himself and how he was measuring himself and the success that he had based on the fact that he had lost money, but he still had everything that should make a man happy. He had his house, he had his family, he was a successful entrepreneur. The reason he got that millions of dollars just because he was really good at business, right? So you could do it all over again. But it's definitely interesting how that becomes a measuring stick for us as men. And I think we tend to do that more often than we think.
Well, and I would have to assume that as he was sitting around the table, sharing his story, I would have to assume that nobody at that table was looking from the outside in, looking at him as being unsuccessful. Sounds like this guy is highly respected, probably somebody that had a lot of credibility to be in a position where, as he was sharing this, other people weren't looking at this and saying, "Oh man, this guy's a total failure." They were probably looking at this and saying, like, "Wow, like not only is this a powerful story in this, reflection, but it reveals a lot about his character and about who he is and what he values the most." And I've got to imagine that probably spawned a lot of self-reflection for a lot of people around that table, because you've been in situations where you've had those self-perceived failures. I've been in those situations where I've had self-perceived failures. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, what's most important to you? What's the thing that drives you each and every day? And we convince ourselves that it's the money or that chase for wealth, but really that's not what fulfills us each day.
Right. Yeah, he lost his money, but he didn't lose his life. And you hit the nail on the head when he did say that. It kind of like raised the hairs on the back of my neck a little bit, because we go to these conferences or we start businesses or we get jobs because we are chasing, oftentimes, some people's status, but for the most part, we're chasing wealth. We're chasing a higher salary. We're chasing more revenue. We're chasing more, cash flow, whatever it is that you're doing these things. But you're doing all these things, and this isn't for everyone, but I would say most middle class and up successful people that are doing well at their jobs or that have a successful business, you already have everything you need in life, right? So realizing that you may lose some money, you may lose a job, you may lose something in life, but as long as you don't lose your family, as long as you don't lose your health, you have everything you need in life, because those are the most important things in life.
But that's the friction point, I feel like, for a lot of us, because like you said, in that pursuit of trying to achieve whatever status we're trying to achieve or whatever goals we're trying to achieve, I almost feel like it's an innate quality in us has been that we're competing against ourselves. And sometimes we allow that competition to really take over and overshadow what's most important to us. We kind of lose sight sometimes as what's most important to us at the end of the day, the people, the relationships, our families. So that's the friction point for a lot of us as men. And I think as we go through this journey of trying to achieve that status, achieve those financial ambitions or personal ambitions, where we get so consumed with the chase and that internal fight amongst ourselves, it's us against us, and we lose sight of the things that really truly have value.
Right. So let's talk about why money carries such an emotional weight for men. Why has money become a scoreboard in life? And some of the things I just think about off the top of my head are money tends to represent safety, competence, success, right? So we sort of use it as a measuring stick, as we talked about. And I think owning that provider role is actually healthy. We're men, we're supposed to be providers. But when it switches from being a provider role to becoming something that you carry your identity around, that's when using money as a scoreboard can actually become really dangerous.
All those points are true, but I also think a step further, like I look at it as it's a status. When we talk about how money takes over identity, it's a status symbol. We're a capitalist society. We're a country and culture that's driven by this pursuit of the quote unquote American dream. And you pave your own future and you control that. And so you can be, fantasy world, you can be anything you want to be. Right. And I think what happens is it consumes us in a way that we're chasing a status and we're comparing ourselves to the Joneses.
Yeah, for that status, Cody, I think sometimes in our head, we can't separate I made a bad investment or I made a bad decision from I'm a failure. We tend to correlate those things for some reason in our head, and we put our head in the sand, we get sad, we get depressed. And then the thing I think was actually cool about this guy sharing his story was the fact that he was owning it. How many people or how many things do we do in life? Whereas men, we're just like, I'm going to sweep that under the rug. I'm not going to tell anyone about that. But actually stepping up in a room full of people, at a dinner with other successful people or other high achievers or people looking to be successful and voluntarily bringing something like that up, that's not something you see every day, right? And that's something that for me kind of labels somebody as high character, because people that are using money as a scoreboard for their success in life, they don't walk around usually and tell you about their losses. So, but I think being able to separate that I made a bad decision, I made a bad investment, from saying I am a failure is super important, so that you don't get stuck again comparing yourself or measuring yourself based on money.
Yeah, Brian, I think the takeaway I have there is it's the more that money becomes your scorecard, the harder it is to feel like you're winning. And it sounds like he's reached that point in his professional maturity to where he was able to separate that and understand that men may prioritize measurable wins because they show immediate proof. But in reality, you don't have to prove anything.
So knowing all that, Cody, the life that money is supposed to buy us, a lot of us already have that, right? Can you talk about, like, maybe for yourself, have you had this epiphany moment where you realize, like, man, I kind of already have everything that I need in life: roof over my head, wife, healthy family, all that good stuff? What is the true wealth that you actually have, being, in your early 40s, somebody who's got all the things you need? Maybe you don't have the billions of dollars you thought you would have at this point in life, but at what point in life did you realize that you actually already have everything you need, a lot like the guy we're talking about?
Well, admittedly, I wish I would have been mature enough to recognize it sooner, but I've shared with you and our audience on the show about a financial experience that I had trying to own and open up a fitness franchise, and how that impacted me and how it cost me at the time a lot of money, and the stress it put on my family. And when we got our real estate portfolio going full steam ahead, and things were going well, and the market started to turn, and we started feeling the impact of that, we found ourselves in a similar position to your friend that you referenced, in that we had several deals that unfortunately weren't successful and ended up in a negative result, and we lost a couple $1 million of investor capital. And I went through the same exercises of just mentally being so, I don't even know how I would describe it. It was just mental turmoil, really. Just this, I guess, a dark place, as you described it, was a great way to describe that, because there's a lot of discomfort and there's a lot of anxiety and stress that comes along with the idea of not only losing your own money, but losing other people's hard-earned money. And after going through the several weeks of trying to digest that and come to terms with that and really accept that, there was a lot of reflection, and it was a lot of conversations with my wife and spending time and actually stepping away from the business to a degree, and really stepping back and looking at what's most important to me every day, which was my family. I set out on this goal to start this real estate empire and go down this entrepreneurial journey because I wanted to provide a certain lifestyle for my family. But through that, and through all the time investment, the energy, at times I've lost sight of that's what was most important. And so through the first experience, and then going through the second experience with this real estate downturn and that impact, that was really the reflection point for me to say, at the end of the day, I still have a great wife, an amazing wife, amazing kids. I still have everything that I need. I have a life of abundance, and it's not just financial, but we were joking about a certain circumstance before the show. It's first world problems, right? We're sitting here complaining about losing money, but yet we still have a roof over our head. We have food on the table. We have relationships with people that love us and that we love dearly. And I think for me, it was kind of going through those two pretty impactful financial situations where it was really that moment of just realizing, like, money's just a tool, it's an object, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's the value of the relationships that are the most important to me.
Yeah, real wealth remains after your bank account changes. The real things in life that are truly your real assets tend to still be standing when your bank account changes, your real estate portfolio changes, a business gets sold or closes or becomes unsuccessful. The things that are remaining, your family, your relationship with God or the church, your kids. Those are the real assets in life. And to your point, obviously we went through a lot of that together and have been through some trials and tribulations, I will say the last, call it 2 to 3 years. I would say it's also been sort of a blessing in a way, because you can get really big headed pretty fast and start to, I think one of the points to make is the symptoms we're talking about where you're using money as a scorecard sometimes tends to come from being successful. When you're winning a lot and everything's going really well and your bank account's growing, you start to unintentionally, I think, correlate how good you are at life or your success in life by using money as a measuring stick. And then the opposite tends to happen when you, if you lose it all really fast or it tends to go bad, you start looking at yourself as a failure. Well, all that tends to just come from experience, right? And you have to experience the pain and the discomfort and the losses. And you have to go through I was talking about, the guy I had dinner with, it took him 2 weeks. My head was in the sand for much longer than that.
Mhm.
But, through some of the trials and tribulations we've had over the past couple of years. Same thing for you. I know, we had some conversations where you had to pick me up and I had to pick you up, and everyone's a little bit different, but you don't often realize your true assets in life, the things that really matter, until you go through those types of experience. So, I always say, for anyone going through that, it's hard in the moment to go through that. It's really challenging to deal with loss, deal with the pain and suffering of a financial loss or a job loss or any type of business failure, but it's going to be okay. What you realize is it may be a couple weeks, maybe 6 months, might be a year, hopefully not longer than that. But those losses tend to open up your eyes so that you don't become somebody who is keeping money as your scoreboard for whether you're successful in life. Because at the end of the day, when you finally die and we're obviously both faith driven men, you still have your faith no matter what. That's another thing we didn't talk about, but it's not like, God is going to be measuring you by like, ooh, bank account's looking a little light today. Can't let you in heaven, right? Like that's just not how things tend to work. So I think all those points are really important.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's another aspect of this conversation too that we lose sight of often is sometimes there's that saying that money is the root of all evil. I never really believed that. I always believe that money just exploits who you really are. If you're a person of good character and you have the right intent to make an impact, a positive impact on the world, when you get money, what are you going to do? You're going to use it for good. You're going to use it to make that positive impact. If you're somebody that's not a person of high character, then chances are when you get a lot of money or wealth, chances are you're not going to use that in a way that's in a very positive way. But I say that to say is in allowing money to consume our identity and take over, we lose sight of our spirituality as well. And our, for guys like you and me who are, have our faith, we lose sight of that too. And it can almost start to really deter us from being those men of high character and high caliber, where we're called to be good stewards to our families and with money and things like that as believers. But sometimes with that chase of money or that chase of wealth, and sometimes those failures can really pull us away from being those good stewards.
Absolutely. And I was thinking about something the other day after I had this conversation with somebody, like I was talking about after dinner. And I think a really interesting exercise to really put yourself in your place, if you feel yourself kind of falling into that, I'm keeping scorecard based on money, is to really stop and think, what things do I currently have today that a younger version of me always wanted or wish they had? And I'm just talking about myself when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, in my teens, right? Early teens, a young adult. I had prayed and hoped for a nice house. Got it. I had prayed and hoped for a beautiful wife that I was happily married to. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
I had prayed and hoped for to have a family, to have a kid or multiple kids. Again, got it. Right. I had prayed to be financially stable and not be living paycheck to paycheck. Got it. I prayed to be healthy and not have major health issues in my life at my current stage. Again, got it. So it's like all these other things were like, man, I wish I bought one more deal last year, or I wish my business was growing faster, or all these other things that we wish for. I think going through that exercise can really humble you and remind you that regardless of what goal you're chasing or dream you're chasing, and again, we're not saying you should just like settle. That's not what we're saying. But I just think doing that exercise and realizing that you already have a lot of the things in life that you probably grew up wanting, maybe because we didn't have it, or it's just something we've always wanted.
And you pointed out something there that I want to just touch on one more time is that when we have those failures, I think that's sometimes the best opportunities for us to take a little slice of humble pie. And it's painful, as you mentioned. It's not an enjoyable experience, and it can put you in a dark space mentally, which impacts not only you, but the people around you. But at the same time, if we allow ourselves to get consumed by that identity, that chase for financial stability, wealth, whatever it is, if we don't stay grounded, we need some of those hard lessons to kind of reground us and bring us back down to a place where we can have that reflection and really reevaluate our priorities and what's important to us. So, having lived through some of those very painful experiences, again, it's not a fun spot to be, but it's absolutely necessary at times. So, Brian, let's kind of talk about then, how do we make this actionable? Like, what are some things that we can really take away from this? And I think it's an important point of the conversation where we realize that a bad financial outcome is something that happened, but it's not a definition of who you are. I lost money on an investment is not the same as I'm a failure. Those are two different identities. And I think we need to learn to separate the results from our identity.
I think you can own your results if it's a failure or loss or something like that without necessarily labeling yourself as a failure or somebody who loses. We had Anthony Vicino on the show, and one of the things he talked about during the conversation was how powerful labels can be, whether we're putting labels on our kids, we put labels on our spouse. Well, we sometimes put labels on ourselves. If we fail at something, if you look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm a failure, I'm unsuccessful, I can't do this, whatever label you're putting on yourself, it's okay to have a challenge or a problem or have a loss in life and to not label yourself as a failure. It's just a moment. It's just something that happened, and it happens to all of us. Just some of us are more transparent about it than others. And I think when you're in that situation, what you can do to sort of get out of that situation, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is just to get really specific about naming the things that the loss did not take. When you're in that moment and you're experiencing financial losses, you have a business that closed, you have a job that you lost, you're really more than likely, just like the conversation I was talking about at dinner, he lost one thing, some money. That sucks. Nobody likes losing money, right? But there's a lot of things he didn't lose. Nobody like came and took the shoes off his feet, right? Nobody took the keys from his pocket and took his car. It's not like he was locked out of his house, right? So sitting down and naming all the things that you actually did not lose, not tying your identity to that loss and labeling yourself, I think are good two places to start to get out of that situation.
I would also say asking yourself, what is money giving you? Sometimes we're not chasing money per se. We're chasing the feeling we assume that money's going to give us. And money can't guarantee anything for us, right? It's just a tool. It can't guarantee security. It can't guarantee freedom, respect, peace. Those are things that have to come internally, that you have to work to build with the relationships and the people around you. So I think it's important that we really look for and identify needs that are being disguised as financial targets. I would also say too, Brian, that we also need to define what enough means before the next win. And when I think about that, so often we set a target for ourselves, and then maybe we come close to reaching the target, or even we achieve it, and then we keep pushing the target even further. And we keep pushing and we keep pushing and we keep pushing. The goalpost continues to move, and enough never becomes enough. And I think that's because we're not clear with ourselves as what's truly going to fulfill this desire or this goal or this wanting to achieve a certain outcome. So if you never define enough, success will keep making promises that it can't keep.
And I think you can want to have a desire to build more without necessarily treating what you have as worthless. Like there's nothing wrong with being ambitious, but realize that what you already have is actually more valuable than what you're chasing in life. So you can pursue future growth without making future results responsible for your happiness today. That's the problem a lot of us make where we're chasing a goal. And goals are good. We like goals. You set
Mm.
goals. I set goals. We're not saying goals are bad, but we can't let the chase of hitting that goal and the journey we're taking along the way impact our happiness today where, oh, just because we haven't hit that goal, we're super sad, right? Or if we lose the game, so to speak, on the way to trying to achieve that goal, it impacts our happiness today.
So I think for me, the last takeaway that I would have is you have to keep building on gratitude. I think it's important that no matter where you are in your journey, no matter what level of success you've achieved, no matter what milestones you've achieved, it's so important that you take the time to reflect back on all the things that you're thankful for, all the things that are most important to you, and really emphasize that each and every single day so you don't lose yourself. You can want to build more without treating what you already have as worthless.
Yeah, Cody, that gratitude piece is something that has been hard to learn for me growing up because I didn't have much growing up. And I've always been somebody who's really hungry. And when you're hungry and you start to get fed, so to speak, you can very easily forget to be grateful about the things you already have, the food you have in your belly, so to speak, to use that analogy. But that gratitude piece is so important for anyone in life to slow down, stop, reflect on the things you already have. And we're talking about using money as a measurement in life, but use the things you already have as a measure. Use the level of gratitude you have, asking yourself, like, man, how grateful am I really? And I think we go through life moves very fast. We have a lot of wins. We also have a lot of losses. And we often forget to measure how grateful we are for the things that we have. And if we slow down and stop and do that and become more grateful for the things we have in life, we'll naturally tend to not use money as a measuring stick because we'll realize, like, I already have everything that I need in life. And circling back on full circle to that conversation, I told you at the beginning, when he said that, I kind of hit me in for a second, even though everyone was kind of still talking. And I had like the kind of like goosebumps or like hairs kind of stand up in the back of your chest. I was like, holy crap, that's such a paradigm shift to think about, man, I didn't really lose anything. I mean, I lost some money, but what is money? It's not even real. Our financial system, it's not backed by anything. It's just paper. It's a valuable thing. We need it to pay our bills and feed our families and
It's a
stuff,
tool.
right? It's a tool, like as you mentioned, but at the end of the day, we have everything we need in life. So, to anyone who's out there who's listening that is chasing something, we're not saying stop chasing. We're saying that stop and think about it. And you might be chasing something without realizing that you actually already have everything you need in life.
Yeah, you've prioritized the chase over what's most important to you, and it's a good reflection. Well, it's good to reflect on that and make sure that you realign those priorities. So, Brian, I want to challenge our listeners and our audience to really reflect back on this and do some self-reflection for themselves. And I first want to challenge our listeners to evaluate what financial result that currently has too much control or influence over their emotions. I also want to challenge the audience to really reflect on what did it change for them.
Yeah, and as they're going through that exercise, just asking themselves too, yeah, I lost something or something bad happened to me, but what are the most valuable parts that are actually still intact in your life? You probably still have a happy, successful home, a marriage, a family, relationship with God and church. Ask yourself what else is still intact, even though you maybe be suffering some losses. And then last but not least, fourth question to ask yourself are, what are you pursuing that you actually already have, potentially just in a different form? Money is a measuring stick. It's a currency, but there's other types of currencies in life. What about love? You may be losing some money and maybe your bank account's hurting a little bit, but what if your house is just filled with an abundance of love? That in itself is valuable when we're talking about reflecting and being grateful for the things that we have. So ask yourself, what are some other things that you have that you actually have an abundance of, even though you might be suffering some losses somewhere else?
Hmm.
Yeah, Cody. So to wrap up, reflecting on that story from dinner, what it really made me realize is when you're going through a loss, do not allow that financial loss you may be feeling to convince you that a family filled with a happy spouse, a family, a relationship with God, a house of love is somehow empty and somehow not saying you're a valuable man and you're not successful in life. The definition of success is not truly tied to your financial well being.
Brian, my definition of success is the quality of relationships that I've built over the years. That's the true measure of success. Brian, when I look back on that story and I reflect back and just listening, to the way that you described it, it sounds like this gentleman really understood the meaning of understanding and defining his identity and separating that from whatever happens in his financial world. And so I think that is an important takeaway for all of us, is to really, as men, make sure that we're emphasizing and really understanding that our identity and who we are is tied to the things in our lives and the people in our lives that are most important to us, and not the money. Appreciate you being here with us. Stay connected by joining our weekly newsletter called The Forge, delivered straight to your inbox with thoughts on business, work, family, and becoming a better man. Make sure to check out forgingbettermen.com to sign up. If this show hits home for you, then hit the follow button and leave us a review to help us reach more guys who would benefit from it. This is Under Pressure.